Alex, what is binary mindset?
A binary mindset is just kind of like a boring way to look at the world, I think. Also, it's lazy. It's intellectually lazy because you're simplifying the world. The world is a very complicated place. That's indisputable. But many people, including myself sometimes, tend to simplify things and make whatever particular issue we're thinking about, make it a good versus bad type thing. We create these scapegoats in our minds, and we tend to kind of try to simplify the problem so we can grasp it a little bit easier. Also, I think it makes us feel better about ourselves. There's virtue signaling, and if we know that a big segment of the population feels the same way we do, we want to broadcast that we're with the good team.
With an agenda, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So what is binary thinking as it pertains to international relations?
So in international relations, we have some very complex geopolitical issues, but often especially in the US, they're boiled down to, good guys versus bad guys. Whether it's Vladimir Putin or Netanyahu or Trump or whoever, people just have this idea that these complex situations, which sometimes will go back to things that happened decades or centuries ago, are just boiled down to basic good versus bad, or this sort of simplistic thinking. And in the case of the current situation in the Middle East with Israel and the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians, the quote-unquote left has kind of equated it with this idea of intersectionality, where the Palestinians are a minority. They're brown, so they get lumped in with everybody else.
Victims.
With this kind of victim mentality of oppressed versus oppressor. So again, it's just this simplified. We try to take these complex situations and make them simplified so we can. Many people are well-meaning when they do this because they become very passionate and they think they're contributing to figuring out a solution, but that's often not the case. Other people, because of the social media age we live in, they know they're kind of cynical, and they're taking advantage of all this for clicks and for views. And in some ways, you don't really have a choice, because if you don't do that as a media content creator, you're not going to survive. So you have to have a little bit of this sensationalism or this kind of binary thinking. And I still don't think it's good overall, but it's in some ways, unfortunately, a necessity. And until we figure out how to more effectively use social media, and media consumers become better at kind of figuring out what's good content versus what's bad content and what's just clickbait, it's going to be a problem. And then, of course, we have AI in the mix, which is further complicating things, where you don't necessarily know what you're looking at or what you're reading is factual or rooted in reality.
Well, the whole world is divided into friends and foes. I think it's kind of characteristic of the U.S.
You and I studied geography in school, at university. You're a student of geopolitics. So we know the world is not simple. It's
But
kind
the
of,
US, does US tend to approach, that's how they approach the world? Especially when push comes to shove, as they feel nowadays?
I mean, it depends. Not necessarily. I think the Trump administration will change on a dime.
Changes the inconsistent.
Yeah, they'll decide,
Like a whim.
from one day to the next who our friend or foe is, based on Trump's gut feeling, or sometimes they just want to manufacture like a story or controversy because they know. I mean, Steve Bannon, who's a close strategist of Trump's and a close ally, has come out and said, we just we'll come up with some crazy things and just 5 times a day we'll say something crazy, and because we know it'll distract from things that we want, our agenda that we want to accomplish. So it's hard to predict with this administration because there's no official friends or foes. Who was the British statesman? Not Churchill, it was, what's his name? He said there are no permanent, I think, do you know the quote also?
Yeah, no permanent friends, only permanent
interest. Yeah, Cromwell, I think, didn't he say that? It was one of the
someone said that, but everybody can see it now,
yeah.
nowadays because everybody can see it.
Yeah, you have no permanent allies. A state has no permanent allies, just permanent alliances, or
permanent interests. Only interests permanent.
Yeah, only interests are permanent. So,
but sometimes interest is hard to see because it depends on your point of view, or you look at near term, medium term, or long term.
Yeah, and I think kind of the problem as religion gets less influential in the U.S. and in other parts of the world, many other parts of the developing world especially, politics becomes a form of religion where, this binary thinking, as it was very popular with religious people, it becomes a sort of comfort, like I'm on the good side. And this has manifested in conversations that I've had with friends, close friends, who are, one of whom lives in Europe and has spent a lot of time in the U.S., so we have a lot of conversations about all this. And this person has said, I suggested at one point about who's left or who's right or who's conservative or liberal, and she said something like, oh, I would never be a conservative. And then a relative of mine, we were having a conversation, and at one point said very passionately, raised his voice, I'm a conservative, something like that. So it was kind of manifested like this sort of search for meaning, like I'm a conservative, that's my purpose in life, or that gives my life meaning, because religion is not as meaningful to people as it once was. And so people will latch on to politics, whether it's international politics or domestic social issues, or how the U.S. handles foreign affairs. They'll kind of try to find meaning. And for me, it should be about finding solutions to problems. And I think we've lost sight of that. Geopolitics and domestic politics is more about finding personal meaning for your own life versus trying to figure out a solution for society. That's what I think we should be trying to do. And John Adams, second president, one of the founding fathers, and also George Washington in his farewell address, when he was leaving the presidency, they both said that the greatest threat to the, I'm just going to paraphrase, the greatest threat to the new republic, the United States, is the establishment of a two-party system. And so that was kind of a warning to us, don't do binary thinking, don't do this sort of us versus them when it comes to domestic politics, because they knew it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect foreign relations, it's going to affect domestic policy. I mean, they had just come through this Revolutionary War. It was, somebody recently I was listening to referred to it as a civil war. I mean, it was basically the first civil war, and then in the 1860s we had the second civil war. So the first civil war, or the Revolutionary War, was the new, the colonies tearing themselves apart until the new nation state was born. And so the two of the most important founding fathers warned us against this sort of binary thinking. So this is not a new idea. This is not something that is revolutionary. It's just
They must have seen the pattern in history.
yeah.
They were hoping that the U.S. won't follow that pattern, but U.S. were humans too.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we settled into this.
It didn't take long, did it?
Yeah, I mean, for a good chunk of the U.S. political system, we did not have just like the two major political parties like we do now. There were other parties, but it's just become, and I think it's because it's easier to manipulate people, and it's related to our electoral system. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a good way to make things better for society here in the U.S., which is very linked to making things better in the world, because the U.S. is such an influential entity in the world.
Right. So U.S. coughs, the whole world gets a flu.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
So do you see the psychological influence consistently from left versus right? Because as opposed to international relations, domestic issues, environmental issues, human rights issues, social justice issues, do you see the consistency between left versus right like this? Necessarily the left in the U.S. will support certain issue on a certain side of certain issue, and if you pick the left in France, for example, they will be consistently on the same side on the same issue. Do you see that?
Yeah, I don't know a ton about European politics. I know a little bit because I follow it as much as I can, and I have friends that live there, and we've had discussions. And yeah, it is. They do. Most countries in Europe have coalition governments and more parties than we do here. But there is still this sort of left versus right mentality. It's different than in the U.S. They put more emphasis on certain things there because, economically they're in a different situation or for whatever reason, or historical reasons. But yeah, to a certain extent, I think it's, again, because in the U.S., we have the ability to kind of monetize these things with social media and other ways. So it's kind of like more emphasized, I guess.
Amplified, right?
Yeah, it's more amplified, yeah. And we have more resources and more access to technology, so we can amplify it more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, money has its magic.
Yeah, Hollywood is kind of all over the world. They have a huge influence all over the world. TV shows and movies and social media influencers, whether it's Mr. Beast or whatever, Americans have a big portion of that audience.
Yeah, I can see that. I can find one pretty obvious example for me, because I'm from Taiwan and they're left, just like the U.S. left. So we can compare the issues and between regions, between cultures. The left in the U.S. happens to be for gay marriage, for environmental protection, more fanatic about it, for support global, believe in global warming is created, and anti-nuclear power. It's the same, the left in Taiwan, they support the same issues. And so that's within the region, they support the same issues, and across regions. the left is the left, no matter who you are, where you are.
So
I find it fascinating.
So the way you phrased those certain issues, you have framed it in this sort of pro or anti kind of thinking, and I think that, like for example, gun rights. Generally people think if someone is pro-gun or anti-gun, or pro-gun control or anti-gun control. That's this kind of intellectually lazy thinking, where we have to accept that it's in the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution. It's not going anywhere, whether you love it or you hate it. Don't look at it as being pro or anti. Look at it as we have a problem of many people who use guns to inflict violence upon other people, whether it's injuring them or killing them. That's a problem, especially when you look at the U.S. versus other countries. So for me, it's about, we have rights here. Let's look at it like Switzerland does. Switzerland, we often think of Europe as being, a place where many of the countries have very strict gun laws. But Switzerland actually promotes responsible gun use. They have kids that are, in grade school or preteen or whatever. It's part of their culture, like for hunting or for whatever reason, they've had it in their culture for a very long time. And they have shooting clubs. It's almost like going to, baseball practice or something like that. So I think we should treat guns in that way, where it's more regulated there. In Switzerland, I don't know all the details, but just, think about it as we have this problem of too many people being victims of gun violence. Let's try to figure out a solution, not, oh, you're anti-gun or you're pro-gun control.
But don't you think there's deep down psychologically, some people are like guns, some people hate guns?
No,
I mean, they can be rationally come to a compromise or implementation of certain policy that's rational to solve problems that you said. But if we get into the deep in their hearts, can't you see some people just like guns, some people don't like guns? That's a starting point, but maybe rationally it manifested in different policies.
They've taught them. They've been taught that by social media and by media and politicians, that if you are on a certain team, you have to like guns. I like guns from the standpoint of from a mechanical standpoint. They're really interesting. Just from an engineering standpoint, I'm not an engineer or anything, but just how they work is very interesting. I've shot guns in the past a long time ago. I don't go out of my way to shoot guns, but they're very interesting to me. They're just a tool, no different than an automobile. They're a little bit different because guns are enshrined in the Constitution, but automobiles kill an inordinate amount of Americans in the U.S. 30,000 or 35,000 people, Americans, every year die because of automobile crashes. Now, would you frame the question as, when we're talking about regulations about automobile safety, whether it's traffic stuff or how cars are made, are you going to ask me, if I propose a certain regulation, are you going to say, oh, are you pro-car or anti-car?
Right, it's more emotional when it comes to guns, firearm. So why do you think that is? Is someone's agenda, or there's another psychological factor at play? Or it's just solely political?
It's many different factors. It's been intertwined with sort of this idea that the U.S. was built upon frontier, manifest destiny, and conquering a big chunk of North America using guns, whether it's to fur traders or to chase away the Native Americans or whatever. we have this idea that like, oh, a real American should own guns, especially if you live in a rural community. So again, I just think it should be more about like, we have this huge problem of gun violence. We have this huge problem of Americans dying in car crashes. Let's just figure out solutions by analyzing the data and making sure everybody's rights are protected. But let's avoid the kind of binary pro or anti,
right. That's rational.
labeling each other with these dumb kind of binary ways of thinking of complex issues. I should have the right to protect myself and my family, whether it's with a knife or a slingshot or a gun. I should have the right to drive a cyber truck or whatever type of vehicle I want, but we have to realize that there's these 2-ton killing machines in some cases where people could use them as weapons. They can get drunk, they can get high, and then be texting or whatever and use these tools in an irresponsible way, which will lead to death and destruction.
But there's certain people, maybe they have some kind of neurosis. They're neurotic about guns. To them, guns are like a special place as opposed to cars. Cars kill people too, but for them, because their neurosis, their psychological condition, they're more sensitive to what guns can do negatively. And so for them, they amplify the guns' negative side. So and they're usually louder when you have certain condition. That makes you louder, makes you more like activist type, more fanatic, if you will. And those people, the louder ones gets the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So I think that's one factor at least that makes guns so different from other things that can cause harm as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is that it's enshrined in the Constitution. It's a constitutional right, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So it's important to talk about. It's a complex issue because it's not just like handguns or rifles. It's
Yeah, those people, same people, they can, like someone already said, oh, they hate guns, they hate Bibles, and then they're afraid of guns, they're afraid of Bibles. So how do you link those two that happen to be on the one side? Why can someone hate guns but love Bibles, love the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty.
Is there a psychological connection between these two, as well as other things?
There's plenty of people who love the Bible but hate guns.
Guns, okay.
But there is this connection.
I mean, what's the connection?
Just like like I said earlier, the frontier, over the.
But what about the Bible? Frontier or in the big city in the back, they both have Bible. How come how is the Bible connected to guns?
Because for certain people, the United States was founded upon Christian ideas and Christian principles. The truth is much more complicated than that. The founding fathers, most of them, or a lot of them, were deists, which is, not necessarily Christian or a personal savior in the traditional Christian sense, but the idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, again, is kind of tied with the idea of manifest destiny. Like, we're a Christian nation and we're going to conquer North America.
In the process, they're victims.
Yeah, and that was
and the blacks, and then ethnic minorities, and now they are the victim because certain neurosis or certain psychological condition. They care about the minorities and the guns. They want to move forwards, to be progressive. They want to progress to the next stage, to the modern days, if you will.
Well,
so the Bible is considered in the past, the guns considered in the past.
I mean, there's plenty of progressives who are Christian, who don't have this binary thinking of like, oh, if I'm Christian, I can't, or I have to love guns, or vice versa, or whatever. It would be much easier if we were in North Korea, where everything is binary. The correct thing is what the dear leader says. You don't have a choice in the matter. You have to do it this way. Here, the Constitution is, and I had a conversation with a friend very recently about the Constitution, and they said, well, the Constitution, it's kind of all written out there for us, like it's our guidebook. No, I mean, the Constitution is very general, like it's open to interpretation. It's
like all laws.
Well,
all laws are open to interpretation. That's
what
we
it's
have
not a
judges.
list. It's not a list of law. Yeah, and so we have an open society. We have a free society here in the U.S., and it's up to us to figure it out. Whereas, like in North Korea, you don't have to figure it out. It's very easy. You just do what the government tells you.
But isn't that North Koreans' choice? They choose to have that government as opposed to U.S.
No,
Americans choose to have government as they have. Also, they want change.
No, the North Koreans cannot choose. They have no elections. They have
Is the election the only way for people to choose what they have for the governance?
When it comes to the issues that you and I are discussing, basic human rights, yes. Because in North Korea, the same dynasty has been in power for 75 years, and they don't have a choice to. The people that live in North Korea don't have. I mean, they can't even leave the country. They can't move freely. They don't have the most basic of human rights, let alone to have a gun or.
Yeah, there are limits to everything, right? There are like 50 states, and no state in the United States can choose to secede from the Union. Right? Everything has a limit. North Koreans, they have their limits in terms of their rights, and only their limits are closer. They're more limited than the U.S. It doesn't mean it's all relative, isn't it? Because ultimately, if you don't want, if a majority, maybe not 51%, maybe like 95% of people, North Korean, choose not to have this dynasty. The dynasty won't last more than any more, like five years beyond 5 years. Don't you think ultimately it's the will of the people? It's just that how rapidly can be reflected in the.
That's like saying if I'm arrested and put in jail, my will set me free. These people are in jail. They don't have.
No, I'm not saying your will. I'm saying the collective will of the people. Because if you commit crime and send to jail, that's the will of the people. If someone committed crime, should go to jail.
The problem is we will never know, because in North Korea it's not a transparent society. It's opaque. There are no elections. There are no.
That's what I'm saying.
There's no way
slower.
There's no way for the people. There's no slow. It's just everything.
Slower to bubble up. Opaque transparency is also relative, don't you think? People know something. Maybe they know something from word of mouth. No one's stupid. They just figure it out. Maybe the media is less open. They figure out. Takes longer to figure out. Maybe its government controls tighter. They have to figure out secretly. But it just only slow it down. And as opposed to here, you have transparency, you have flourished media. But media has a lot of bad news, a lot of fake news, a lot of propaganda as well. You just have propaganda maybe compete with each other, depends on the issue. But some propaganda has no competition because they happen to converge. Both parties converge on a lot of foreign policy issues.
No, you can't say there's no competition in the U.S. or in the Western.
I said it depends on the issue.
Western world, because you can go on your little device and go on the internet, and you could find any.
I said depends on the issue. Of course, I can say.
No, any issue you could find, and you could find 100 different opinions. You go in the comment sections, maybe a lot of them are bots, but you will find many different opinions on whatever the issue
True.
is. It's
True.
incredible what is on the internet, like things you could never imagine are on the internet because we're so open and transparent. And
Some things are lopsided though. Yeah, you can have competition on everything, but some like 59 versus 41, some like 99 versus 1. That case is what I say, oh, maybe there's no competition. There is competition. 1%, 0.1% is competition. But realistically, that's very lopsided, as if there's no competition. Essentially, no competition, certain issues.
So social media is new to us. AI is even newer for us. AI in its current form and social media in their current form. We've always had social media, whether it was like Hollywood movies or the radio. The radio was very influential in the U.S. The President Roosevelt used to have fireside chats where people were glued to the radio listening to what the president would say, and similar to people are glued to Truth Social now or Twitter.
Yeah, the difference is social media is more accessible.
So, but it's the democratization of social media where, back then there was like two networks or whatever here in the U.S. that had controlled the radio stations. Now, everybody, Mr. Beast, the biggest YouTuber on the planet, toiled in obscurity for 10 years when he was very young, when YouTube first started, and he just honed his craft. He became better and better and better at it and figured it out, and he was nothing. He was just a regular kid, and now in his late 20s or whatever he is, he's like the richest YouTuber on the planet because he worked at it, he figured it out. So when I say that's the democratization of the internet or of media, there's a perfect example for you.
Right. I can see the difference between traditional.
Yeah, Charlie Tucker is the same way. He was just a normal guy in college or whatever, and he was able to figure out the algorithm.
So that kind of alleviated binary thinking, at least the downside of it. Do you see the democratization of the media, of the access?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword because, as we discussed earlier, people with power will, especially politicians and the news media especially, knows that they could exploit this sort of us versus them mentality to kind of generate clicks and generate revenue.
In terms of us versus them, do you see that as irrational in general, or does some cases make sense? In terms of like internationally, who's with the U.S., who's against U.S., it sounds like a binary way of thinking, right? Is that reasonable, or how can that be improved upon?
To a certain extent. I mean, we have allies. Historically, we have new allies. But at the same time, I know that every country, maybe not every country, but the powerful countries spy on one another. So, like Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Trust our allies, but also don't trust them too much.
So, do you think Russia is necessarily a foe or ally, or it's a binary that you condemn?
No, I think you just look at there's a problem. Russia invaded another country. What's the solution?
Why did they invade Ukraine? I suppose you're talking about Ukraine, right? Why did Russia invade Ukraine?
Russia has invaded a lot of places throughout the decades and the centuries, as the U.S. has, as every powerful country has. But your question was, why did Russia invade Ukraine?
I'm leading to something, but yeah, we're step by step. You say Russia invaded another country.
Yeah, Russia invaded Ukraine because Vladimir Putin, wants to hold on to power, and this is one way for him that he thinks he can do that. another idea that I think is pretty compelling is historically that region of Eastern Europe has been kind of like a stepping stone for other empires or powers, Western European powers, to kind of sweep in to invade Russia, whether it was the Germany or whoever else, France or whoever. So that's why the Iron Curtain was there as a buffer, and Putin still, whether he really believes it or not, I don't know, but that's one of the, from a geopolitical standpoint, is we have to kind of have this buffer between
Isn't
us.
that reasonable?
No.
From either side?
No.
Is it reasonable for the West to have a buffer zone?
No.
You don't think there should be a buffer zone?
No, because Vladimir Putin, when he says, or when he presents that as a reason, I don't think it's viable or credible, because back 20 years ago he was looking to, at one point he even wanted Russia to join NATO and to kind of be a part of the Western Europe, economically. There's all sorts of trade deals with energy and things like that. So, no, I mean, the days of European powers invading each other through military force up until 2022 were over. I mean, it hadn't happened in many, many decades. I mean,
in place of that, don't you see the moving of the forces as a means of intimidation? And when you have upper hand in terms of intimidation, you can have more leverage on the other side. It's like a step by step. Would you want to be on the receiving side? If you're Russian, think from the Russians' perspective, and if you were Vladimir Putin in his position, what would you have done? Given let's say in 2022, in February 2022, you haven't started a special military operation yet. What would you have done, or what would you be a policy to continue from that point on, as opposed to starting the special military operation?
I would have been seeking to, improve the lives of Russians. I would have been
security, in terms of security.
In terms of security.
Yeah. In terms, because that at least is his argument, right? That's his position. We are under threat because you keep threatening us by eastern expansion, and he had repeatedly brought it to the Western's attention in formal and informal occasions, in like Munich conference, and in one-on-one position in diplomatic channels. He had done that. He had made that attempt so that he won't get to the point that he had to take military operation. So what would you have done instead?
So I'm confused because you're saying that there was an invasion of Russia. You're implying that
no,
the Western powers.
NATO Eastern expansion.
So what is NATO?
NATO is NATO. There's
okay. So did they take any territory away from Russia? Number one.
Okay.
They did not. I'll answer for you. They did not. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, 25 years ago or whatever, joined NATO. So this is
true. You're not talking from the Russians' perspective. I'm not being a judge over here.
No.
I'm just doing an experiment. Okay. You talking from the West perspective for the most part. Well, they didn't violate any international law. They didn't use force invading any other country. They just, at their own will, NATO's own will, to accept countries who apply. Right? It's totally within their legal rights. Right? That's from Western perspective. But from the Russians' perspective, that's not the point. The point is they feel threatened. And the bottom line, they feel threatened. So let's put you in Putin's
Okay,
position.
so when you say,
You're, as president of the Russian people, with this fear, with this perception, what you have done?
so when you say they feel threatened, there is no they, it's just Putin.
Russians. Oh,
He's a-
really? Are you sure?
Yes, he's a dictator,
Okay.
and he's been in power for
How do you define dictator?
27 years.
How do you
Through
define
his various
dictator?
positions, he's not always been president, or, you know, he kind of,
Where do you draw the
When
line you shouldn't
he's
serve?
manipulated the system where he just kind of goes back and forth from prime minister to president, and, you know, kind of shuffles around.
That's
For
within
the
legal
illusion.
rights.
So from the standpoint of, you have the same leader, commander-in-chief of the military forces, and the same executive for almost 3 decades.
Where do you
That-
draw the line?
that
50
goes-
years, 8
that-
years?
That goes to show you
Uh,
that this is a person who's only not interested in the well-being. And I have Russian friends who have kind of told me the same thing. And, you know, if you go on social media, you can find many sources that kind of like show that Russians are not fans of Putin. But what I would have done is, I mean, I know that if I'm the Russian president, I know I'm a nuclear power. I don't need to invade other countries because they're not a threat to me, because I'm a nuclear power.
But your opponent is nuclear power as well.
Who?
You are US. US is a nuclear power, so is France and Britain.
The U.S. has
Doesn't
not-
mean the nuclear power, you're not the only nuclear
Okay.
power. US was once the sole nuclear power. That's why they used it. But now you're nuclear power, you're constrained by the other nuclear power. So that's no longer a decisive advantage to protect, to ensure your security. So what would you have done? I hear you say that you don't think Russian people are concerned about their security as opposed to pertaining to the NATO or the Western Europe, and plus the US. Is that your?
This is just Putin, basically a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, of the people with power kind of exploiting this sort of binary thinking. In this case, Putin, in his speeches, he'll go on and talk for an hour about traditional values and how about the West is you know, decadent, and, you know, he's the guy who's part of the East, whether he uses Orthodox Christianity to kind of show that he's this defender of traditional values and things
That
like
is traditional. If you look into Russian history, that is their traditional value. So you have a
What's that?
president that's
Well,
response.
Russian history, we're not going to go into the centuries of Russian history, because Russia is very diverse. There's many different religions, there's many different ethnicities, there's many different cultures there. So just like the U.S., just like
The mainstream, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, he's not, he just uses this sort of binary nonsense, intellectually lazy thinking to exploit and to hold on to power, like for the last 27 years. And even before that, he had power behind the scenes. But that's all he's not really interested in.
Let's say if a lot of Russians are concerned, a lot, I mean, I don't mean majority or vast majority, just enough people in Russia who are concerned about this NATO eastern expansion, and their president, which I hypothetically put you in that position, if you don't respond to that fear, that part of the population, maybe over half, maybe less than half, but significant portion, you think you're doing your job?
So I'm concerned about the expansion of the CSTO, which is Russia's version of NATO, which is an alliance of Central Asian and
Former republics.
former Soviet socialist republics. I don't remember how many there are, but I don't understand why we never hear about the CSTO and the threat it poses to NATO. Why don't we ever hear that?
Their
It's very interesting why
their mission is to maintain the security relations with former republics, and also prevent or suppress their, because each Central Asian countries, they have their own opposition, internal problems, or terrorism. So they want to help each other out to, well, let me finish. Help each other out with regard to each other's terrorist issues. Also, they want to build trust. So now we broke up. We're no longer one country. We want to make sure we have trust with each other, meaning we don't put troops along our borders. So that's their point. As opposed to NATO. NATO is outward. They want to defend themselves against the threat from the outside. But the CICS, whatever, their main point is not defend themselves from the outside. So that's a fundamental difference between NATO and that organization.
That was very clear because Armenia was part of the CSTO, I believe, and a couple of years ago when they were having problems with Azerbaijan, Putin had personally, as part of the agreement with the CSTO, that they had, Russia was supposed to come to the aid of their quote-unquote traditional Orthodox brethren, Orthodox Christian brethren in Armenia, and they did not. Putin ignored that obligation, so it's meaningless.
Are both countries in CSTO?
I don't remember.
I remember, what I remember.
I don't think Azerbaijan is, but Armenia is. And so, like,
so realistically,
that's why this person has no credibility, or very little credibility.
Now we're going to a different issue. But let's stay on this issue, the CSTO.
No,
I remember at the time.
No, hold on, let me finish, because you said it's the same exact issue. You said it's to, protect the member states. And that's its entire.
Again, no, that's what I'm saying. If you allow me to clarify myself. It's to protect each member state from terrorism. And when it comes to also build trust with each others by not amassing troops along the borders with each other. So when there's a problem, when there's a war, it was a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Putin was very torn because he couldn't. Because his position, Russia's position, it's a very tough position. They can't be on either side. That would be against the CSTO charter, if you will, or the spirit of it. That's why he was very torn. That's what you saw. He was indecisive. He didn't take
No, he was
action.
decisive.
Well, just say inconsistent. Well, tell me, clarify yourself.
He decided not to honor the obligation of the CSTO. And
What is the obligation?
It's a military alliance.
Protect their member states?
Yes, it's a military alliance, and.
So what, don't you think because it's not that he's not unable to, there's another case, another state, I can't remember at the tip of my tongue. They had an internal coup, and he immediately said.
Kazakhstan, maybe.
No, not Kazakhstan, the other one. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. He immediately sent the special troops, not that much, probably 1,000, 2,000, immediately to quell. So he put the existing regime back into place, security. So that's part of the CSTO's charter. That's their purpose, to ensure the security of all the current governments. But against between two countries. So what would the Russian president do? Well, that's not part of the CSTO charter. So when there's a war between the two countries within the organization, what should I do? That's what Putin was put in a tough position.
Azerbaijan is not a member.
So that's also that's a different issue, right? Like NATO, for NATO, will be what's it called? Provision 5, something, Article 5,
Article
right?
5, yeah.
You will defend your member state against outside threat.
Yeah.
But apparently, to me, CSTO is not obligated to defend the nation, the member state against outside threat. Right? That's why Putin didn't take that action, because by treaty, he wasn't obligated to.
No,
But why was
Russia-
it torn?
Russia was
Why was it
obligated.
torn? Because from Russia's perspective, they want to maintain good relations with both countries, whether you're in CSTO or not. That's why, from my point of view, he was torn. It's very hard for me. I think he actually expressed that sentiment in a conference when he was the speaker. He was under like Q&A. He expressed that kind of feeling that he kind of didn't know what to do, to be blunt. So that, well, my point is that there's different purpose for CSTO as opposed to NATO. So for you to compare these two, I don't think that's the right way to.
So they're both military alliances, and so I just don't understand why we hear about NATO being bad, but nobody.
Because NATO is expensive.
Hold on, let me finish.
CSTO isn't it? Give me an example that CSTO was expensive.
CSTO is expensive.
How?
Other countries have joined. Not every country joined all at once,
Uh-huh.
and whether they did or didn't is irrelevant. Now, you keep saying that NATO expansion is bad. It's not bad.
I'm not saying
You know,
bad. Yeah, I avoid those words. I can replay this video. I didn't say bad, right? Did I?
Oh, no, you're saying it's a credible reason. I'm looking.
There you go.
I'm
Yes,
looking
I said it's a credible reason.
You asked me to step into the shoes of Putin. So
Right.
I'm in the shoes of Putin right now, and in Putin's eyes, he sees NATO expansion eastward as a threat.
Right. There you go.
To Russia's national security. Now, there's a big lie that in certain geopolitical circles that, and this is kind of like the people who are just kind of like pop culture geopolitical people who don't really get into the thick of things, but they'll say back in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the West, whatever the West is, promised the Russians, whether, I don't remember if it was Boris Yeltsin in charge or whoever was in charge of Russia at the time, that NATO would not expand east towards the east. That is not true. There was no formalized agreement. Nothing was ever written down. Nobody knows if it was something that Bill Clinton said or State
James
Department
Baker said that.
or James Baker or whoever. Nobody knows.
The people, they're witnesses. They're American
Okay,
witnesses.
so that's not how international relations work. International relations work with things that are written down and everybody agrees.
Sure.
And things are ratified.
Yeah, normally.
That's how it
But
works.
someone said that, someone in the position of James Baker said that, okay, without written it down. And also there's a dispute about the wording. It's, I can't remember at this moment. So if it's not written down, so you don't have to abide by it,
Well,
isn't that erosion of trust? Isn't trust very important in terms of between nations, especially powerful nations?
You're playing a game here. Like, when it comes to international relations, I know you agree with me that everything has to be written down and agreed upon and ratified.
No, we're talking about different issues. Yes, true. But when you say something in an occasion that matters, when you're in a position of power representing the U.S., representing the West, you say something, okay, you don't abide by it because it wasn't written down, doesn't erode the trust in Russians for the West?
No, because you have politicians all the time, because for weeks, when Russia in 2022 was amassing their troops on the border of Ukraine, and the international community was asking Putin and Russia, what's going on here? They said, oh, it's just normal exercises. That we promise we're not going to invade.
That's not what they asked. What's going on?
No,
they know what's going on.
Putin was asked, and he told the international community, and then
they told him repeatedly, from 2007, if not earlier than that. Then repeatedly, as it getting more intensive after 2014, as until 2020, 2021, and they had a summit between Putin and Biden. the negotiation or attempt on the Russian side to negotiate gets more intensified. They didn't get a proper.
You're getting off track. You asked me about like what political leaders say verbally in press conferences and stuff.
Yeah.
And Putin, up until the very last, literally the last hours, was saying, no, we're not going to invade Ukraine.
That's what I said.
Which is fine.
No,
because there was but there was a written agreement in the 1990s. I forgot I forgot what it was called. There was an actual document where Russia wrote down that we will not invade Ukraine, and the deal was that a condition of that, Russia not ever invading Ukraine, was they had to give up their nuclear weapons, and they did. This was after Ukraine independence. They said, okay, Russia, we will write this down, you will sign, we will sign, we agree to give up our nuclear stockpile, and you agree to not invade us.
But you know what happened? You know what occurred between back then, let's say 1994, between then and 2022? A lot of things happened.
Yeah, correct.
That changed Russia. You can say, well, now if I sign something in 1994 not to invade, then Ukraine can do anything to Russia, and Russia will still abide by that. We're not going to invade Ukraine.
Correct.
You think that's reasonable? You
Correct.
think that's how international affairs are conducted?
They should not be conducted in that way. But
that's what happened. That's what happened. That's what
Ukraine invaded Russia. That's what happened.
Ukraine internal. It's not that. That's not you're.
No, I'm
against. You're against the binary sentiment.
I'm asking you to clarify.
Yeah, but it's not invade or not invade. It's not binary, okay? There are a lot of things you can do to the other country short of invasion.
Okay, what do you believe that the 2022 invasion of Ukraine by Russia was justified? Do you believe that all these things that we talked about?
Okay, you asked me a question and I answer. I think it's not legally justified, but realistically, I can understand. I'm able to understand. From Russia's perspective, as Putin, the president of Russia, leader of Russia, considering Russian sentiment, mainstream sentiment, I can understand from that standpoint. But legally, well, invasion is invasion. United Nations Charter, you're not supposed to use force against another sovereign country or threat of force. So that's violated. But I can understand realistically, countries do that, including the United States of America. Countries do that. That's circumstance. That's realism. That's reality you have to deal with.
So you said legally. I mean, there's no such thing as legal or illegal when it comes to international relations because there is no international law. There's
no international law?
No, there's things like the UN chart. UN.
That's
charters.
international law. That's law.
No, those are non-binding.
No, it isn't binding.
No.
It is binding. Okay. It is binding. I'm not trying to.
You're thinking of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which is separate from the UN.
That's international law. United Nations charters.
I'm getting to that. United Nations charters are non-binding in the sense that if someone violates a UN charter, there's no recourse. Like there's economic sanctions.
That's why United Security Council.
There's no UN.
It's a different system.
Yes, but there's
ICC is pursuing an individual. ICC is pursuing individual because for ICC, nations, states cannot be punished. Only individuals can be punished. They pursue individuals. They put warrant on someone. Right? But United Nations Charter is every bit of international law. And who's going to enforce that? United Nations Security Council, as opposed to ICC.
In practicality, there's no such thing as international law.
Okay.
So that's beside the point. If you were, I'll ask you, because you said you can see some justification, you can understand Putin's reasoning. If you were in his position, would you have invaded Ukraine in 2022?
I would probably do the same.
You would have?
Otherwise, I feel I wouldn't be doing my job.
Okay, so what would, in your mind, I'll put you in Putin's shoes, what is the threat to the Russian people? And who is the threat coming from?
The threat is from the West, from the US mainly. If they push to Ukraine, and they will be able to, you mean NATO, include Ukraine into a part of NATO, they will be deployed mid-range missiles in Ukraine territory, which is very close to St. Petersburg and Moscow. You know, intermediate range missiles, they're very hard to defend because they're so close.
Yeah, I mean the Baltic states are.
Well, I cannot subject my own country to that kind of threat, because once they put it there, just like in the 1960s, the Soviet Union put missiles in Cuba. Once you allow that, they have a lot of leverage over you. So you have some dispute, international dispute, whatever dispute, not necessarily territorial dispute, even the economic dispute, trade dispute, any kind of dispute, they have a leverage over you. You don't want to put yourself in that position. As a president of Russia, you don't want to put your country in that position. When there's a dispute, believe me, there will be dispute. And when they have that leverage, which means an intermediate range missile near your border, within striking distance from your capital and major cities. You know, major cities in Russia is in the West, right? So you cannot have that leverage on your opponent's side, and there will be dispute, and you put yourself in a disadvantage. Let alone, there's also a possibility there will be fire the missile into your territory. But short of that, still that's a leverage as a president you should not allow.
So today in 2026, there are 4 nation states, I believe, now that border Russia within striking distance of St. Petersburg and Moscow. Actually, those nation states are even closer to St. Petersburg than Ukraine. And, I can't remember the exact distance from Moscow. So,
Sweden, yeah.
So if you were in Putin's position, or do you think Russia, in order to secure the Russian Federation, do you think they should invade? Because there is a lot of fear.
They cannot invade now. Okay.
There is a lot of fear.
Give me one country.
There is a lot of fear in the European mindset that Putin will continue. I'll give you an example. I'll pick Latvia.
Latvia, yeah.
Probably the weakest of the.
Latvia, they have Russian warplanes over Latvia or near Latvia's airspace pretty frequently.
Do you think Russia should invade Latvia?
Well, they have different ways. If they feel necessary, it's not about should or should not. If they did, I would understand. And if they didn't, I would also understand, because they take different measures. But it's a different condition, different theater, if you will. Ukraine is a much bigger country. It's the composition of the internal political climate and the cultural composition, the population is different. So you deal with it differently, let alone it's different size country. So it's not like Russia is totally ignoring Latvia as a part of the NATO. They deal with that, Baltic nations, different ways that they deal with Ukraine. Obviously, they have other considerations, not even cultural, historical considerations. So they based on history, their experience, Ukraine is a different threat than Latvia, apparently. That's why they deal with it differently, also given geographic circumstances, different circumstances. And the Baltic, Crimea, right? They don't want to lose Crimea, but if Ukraine has reinforced part of NATO, maybe the next step they will have some leverage or even a possibility to recover Crimea back to Ukraine, which Russia definitely doesn't want. So you can see the different circumstances, they deal with it differently. But just because they deal with it differently doesn't mean they're inconsistent or their action against Ukraine is not understandable.
It's very inconsistent because if the threat is as real as you presented it, Putin and Russia.
Even
maybe,
real,
maybe
see, that's binary, real or not real, right? It's not, see, you're falling your trap, which I understand, I fall into that trap too. It's not real or not real, it's like how, it's a gradation. How severe, how urgent, how strong, right? It's not real or not real, everything is pretty much real.
Is Russia more secure now?
They're trying, I mean, compared to what?
Do you think they're more secure now than before the invasion in 2022?
Yes, I think they're secure, more secure now. Oh, no doubt.
So
I have no doubt in my mind.
So there's been military attacks regularly on Russian soil with Ukrainian drones. Ukraine has gotten an influx of money for their defense. So I mean, I would tend to disagree because of that.
Right, but that's
because of the sanctions and.
That's a Monday morning quarterback. But at the time, I'm trying to understand Russia. Maybe Putin didn't make the best decision, but I could understand why he did what he did. I'm not condemning him because he's dictator or he's power hungry, he wants to stay longer in power and manipulate the situation. I'm not condemning him. I'm just saying I understand him. That's what I endeavor to do. I want to understand why people do what they do.
Yeah, I have I think a more clear understanding of his motivation because I've kind of studied him. I've been to Russia. That doesn't really mean much that I've been to Russia.
Oh, I've been to Russia too.
I've talked to people. Yeah, that doesn't mean that's like saying somebody that comes to the U.S. understands everything about the U.S. But like, I don't just stare at a screen. I've talked to Russian people.
Me too.
I've had close relationships with Russian people. And yeah, some of them are.
Maybe I don't.
Some of them are big fans of Putin. Others not so much. But ultimately, anybody that stays in power for decades, I have a strong distrust of like they're megalomaniacs. They're arrogant. They think they're the only ones that can fix the problem. They have a problem with giving up power. And those are the types of leaders that we should. And George, this is not my idea. George Washington, he was president for 2 terms or whatever, and they wanted him to stay. There was talk of him becoming a king and becoming, having maybe not a king, but being president for life. They were still trying to figure out how this new nation state would work, and they're like, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, they had that kind of struggle. And because all of these ideas were very new in this context. And so the conversation was, well, this guy Washington, he's a war hero, he's brilliant, we need to just leave him in power indefinitely until he dies. And he himself said, no, I don't want that. I'm going to retire, I don't want that anymore. And we did have, in the U.S. until 1945.
I mean, that's a good story about a country's founding father. That makes the country look very good. Yeah, because George Washington, according to the narrative, it's very unique. It's the greatest of the world, in the world. But he also cut the cherry tree and told his father, oh yeah, I did it. I'm sorry, I did it, right? Also, at the time, the U.S., how much the presidency paid? And it's challenging. The U.S. was freshly founded. I said the presidency is a very hard job, and it wasn't very rewarding. So it was easier for a leader to say, okay, I'm not going to continue. I'm going to go home. Maybe his health was failing because he died not many years after that. Maybe he felt, well, I better have like a quiet time at home. They constantly had arguments. James Monroe, he's tired of it. I'm a little old now. I have my farm there. I still have slaves that can serve me. I want to go home. I don't want to stay in that crappy Washington D.C., different political turmoil. He's tired of it. He went through war. What presidents have been to war like that? For 4 years, finally found the father, only see my health probably sacrificed for that, and now the country doesn't, the presidency doesn't pay much, and there's a lot of risk, and maybe I just better go home. There are plenty of people wanting to be president. Let them.
Well, I don't know about any of that, but that could be true.
That could be true. Like, it's not in the history book, but in common sense, it's reasonable to think that how even someone like George Washington will have those things cross his mind, right?
We can speculate, but what we have are things written down, and Washington himself expressed fear of, the experience with the king, King George, from the English king. They did not want a repeat of that, and the U.S. presidency back then, and the country as a whole, was brand new. It was not secure, as we saw, just 20 years later, or about 20 years later in the War of 1812, the White House was burned to the ground. So there was the threat of the UK wiping out, retaking control
right, that's right,
of the colonies again.
It's still under threat. Yeah.
So there was so maybe that was part of it. He just felt like he didn't want to take on that challenge anymore of being this unstable new republic, and we don't know. We just know what he said or what was written.
Isn't that reasonable speculation? What I just said. It's nothing out of ordinary. I'm not that smart.
I can't.
You can't make that up.
There are historians, plenty of historians, who have written about Washington, and they can, I'm sure there's tons of stuff on the internet. But yeah, that's definitely a possibility, and it's interesting. I would look into it because I've always wanted to learn more about the founding fathers and their personal lives and things like that. But yeah, I mean, that very well could be.
So George Washington, one thing that he foresaw, as well as some other his peers, is like a party system. He didn't want the country. He wanted a republic in a democratic form without party system.
Yes, he warned against, along with John Adams, warned against the two-party system because.
It was not just two-party, right? Any kind of political party, right? But that didn't stop people from going that direction.
Yeah, he just didn't want the parties to have too much power, I think, and there was this idea of how do we establish the electoral process? How do we build this where it's going to be sustainable?
So what should Putin have done? What he should have done that way
in 2020?
Like Washington had done, like as we are taught that Washington had done. Like Putin said, well, it's 8 years. I should resign as opposed to continue. He got in power. Should have resigned in 2008. He got in power in 1999 or 2000.
He actively changed the. I don't know if he changed the Russian Constitution.
He probably did, yeah.
Yeah, because I want to say it was like maybe 10 years ago, because there were limits against the a particular leader staying in power past their allotted time, and so he and the other Russian law, the Duma, I guess, or I don't remember the exact mechanism, but they changed that system where he was allowed to stay in power, basically, probably for the rest of his life.
Can he single-handedly change it, or he needs some support?
No, I'm pretty sure there was, but the way their government is set up, it's not, it's easier for one person to hold more power and to make those changes.
How so? Can you give me?
I can't speak to the at one point I knew more.
Appears to you that's easier to appears to you the Russian system. Appears to you easier to change the constitution kind of single-handedly.
Yeah, because here in the U.S. it's very different. We have to have. It's very, very difficult to change the U.S. Constitution, and to change something like term limits. So
They did
in
it.
Russia, I'm sure it is easier, and it didn't take much for Putin to do that, and set himself probably as president for the rest of his life.
Well, even if they eliminated term limit somehow, doesn't guarantee, it's not a monarch. Monarch has no term limit. Also, monarch is not subject to periodic re-election. But even though you eliminate the term limit or extend the term limit in Russia, it doesn't exempt you from re-election.
Yeah, I hesitate to speak more on Russian domestic politics because I don't know a lot about it. I have a pretty superficial.
But you already indicted Putin of all those crimes.
Yeah, of course, because an invasion, I mean, it hadn't happened. I've listened to him talk kind of, the kind of talking points of, he'll go back 1,000 years and talk about nonsense, about, things that happened.
Which part of this nonsense?
Hundreds of years ago. And appealing to, it's very manipulative. He's just trying to appeal to this sort of like, much like the U.S. politicians do. They just try to appeal to people's patriotism, and they know many of their constituents are maybe not the most well educated, and so they just kind of try to exploit that, which for their own, for personal gain. I could see you think he's doing it for the security of Russia and for the betterment of Russia. That's where we disagree. I do not agree that he's doing. Actually, I think that in his mind, he thinks his own well-being he conflates it with the well-being of Russia because he's a megalomaniac. He's a.
Oh yeah, I think if you put yourself in the shoes of any leader, world leaders, or any or all, they all tie their own personal safety to the nation. Can you see that?
Well, again, I'll use the example of.
Because when a nation loses a war, who gets it first? The leader gets it first.
I will refer back to the U.S. founding fathers, because they knew if this experiment failed, if this revolution failed, they would have been executed. There was no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. So they
in the ensuing law, in the ensuing war, if U.S. loses World War I, World War II, right? See, Germany lost World War II. So see what happened to their leader. So if U.S. loses World War II, what's going to happen to the leader is not going to be pretty.
So there was a world war. There were teams of belligerents on either side. Hirohito survived. He was not executed.
Right, but there's a risk. There's a risk.
Correct.
There are a lot of their prime minister was executed. Right? And when England invaded in 1812, James Madison had to evacuate White House. Why did he evacuate? Because he didn't want to get caught. If he got caught, not only the nation loses the war, maybe he will have to be hanged. Maybe he doesn't want to put himself. So my point is, every leader, to more or less extent, you tie your life to your nation's in the war. In the wartime, tie your security to the nation. See what happens to the Iranian leaders right at the beginning of the invasion, or not invasion, the attack, the war, right? That's a real possibility, isn't it?
Yeah,
So how many attempt on Netanyahu's life, right? That's a real possibility. Well, not to mention Trump's life. Who knows, right? Well, who knows undercurrent? Mm-hmm. You work at FBI, right? You know those.
Used to work there.
Right. But I use it past tense. That's a real possibility, isn't it? So you can't fault Putin for tying him in his personal safety to the nation's safety, isn't it?
I can, and I do, because in the same way that I credit the United States founding fathers of putting the the country's well-being against their, like, they should have just surrendered to the British. If they were concerned about their own well-being, they should have just said, okay, we tried, all right. Well,
Surrender?
yes.
Surrender is not necessary.
There were people, Benedict Arnold surrendered, he betrayed the US, and maybe he thought that it
He's
was
not a leader.
He was a patriot, he was a huge leader in the
But he could be used as a pawn.
revolutionary military, and he decided that he was gonna betray because maybe he saw the writing on the wall and thought, okay, we're not gonna, because for much of the American Revolutionary War, it did not look good for the rebels.
But if you're the leader, Benedict Arnold, his level, he can be used as a pawn. He could be okay with it. But the leader, you don't have that kind of leeway. You're more at risk if you're on the losing side. If your opponent, your enemy occupied your country, you try not to put yourself in that. You can still surrender, but that's your last resort. You want to try everything else first.
So we talk about the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. There's no, in Russia, throughout Russian history, it's strong men. You don't really talk about, I'm sure there are other figures, but there's Rasputin and the Tsar. There's Putin. Who are Putin's, like, who are the people that kind of coalesced for the greater good? You don't really see that in Russia. You just see, and a lot of it is due to their geography, and a lot of our the U.S. situation is due to geography, where we're more secure. And Russia is prone to invasion over the centuries, and from a geographic standpoint, they have been historically at risk. So they have had the misfortune of strong men who will not necessarily be looking out for the best interests of their people.
Well, I think you get. I can see that, right? It's always the strongest man gets to the top in the Russian environment. The U.S. is also the strongest person gets to the top, but the strongest person in the ballot box, because U.S. has a luxury to now consider force first. They get the luxury because they have certain protection, right? South to a weak country, friendly country, north to another weak country, and two sides of the oceans insulated United States. So they have the luxury to say, oh, we go to a ballot box. I'm the strongest guy, but not in terms of military power or the influence in the military, but most popular. Let's put it that way. It just comes down to popularity content. I'm the most popular, therefore I can garner the most vote. But still, I'm the strongest among all the competitors. Just not that way, but the essence, the nature of the beast is the same. The strongest guy, the strongest person gets to the top. But the Russian environment, their strongest has to be military strongest as a leader, influence in the military. Why? Because they're under threat. Therefore, the Russians realistically, or have the mentality, they're under the mentality of we're under threat. That's why they have these fears. That's why Putin spoke to when he made the decision to invade Ukraine. You say Putin, the West they took note that Putin's amassing troops around the Ukraine border, eastern border. Mm-hmm. They had done that for quite a few months. They just reinforced a little bit more. Of course, Putin's not going to tell you what he was telling you for a long time. You can pursue your own security at the expense of someone else's security. So we should talk. I understand you feel insecure, but I'm open to talk. We should negotiate. He took that stand. He made that clear, tried that communication up to the last moment, literally. Mm-hmm. But of course, when you ask him why are you moving the troops around near the Ukrainian border. He's not going to tell you, oh, I'm going to invade it in February 2024,
yes, but the problem is when certain people will criticize the US president or the French president or the Canadian prime minister or whatever, oh, they lie. But when Putin lies, it's a different situation. Oh, you know, he's a brilliant leader. You know, he's just looking out for his people. So it's this double standard which kind of comes from like this binary thinking of Putin's a good, you know, he's just a good guy. I just like him. And Sleepy Joe Biden is a liberal. I don't like him.
But see,
he's woke. He's woke, whatever. So I don't like him. So I'm going to apply different standards to Biden. Biden lies, and I don't like Biden for the record. But Putin, you know, he's lying, but and it's the same thing with Trump. Trump lies, but you know, he knows what he's doing. Wink, wink. You know, he's playing 5D chess, whereas Biden lies, but he simultaneously has dementia, but he's also a brilliant strategist, and he's lying. So it's just like people do these mental gymnastics because they have to justify being on the team. It goes back to my close friends who are like, I will never be a conservative, or the other one was saying, I am a conservative. Like, these are mild-mannered people, but they got very passionate when talking about these issues, and we should avoid that sort of thing. There's a very good example of this, a stark example of a guy who was, he was growing up during the civil rights era, and you know, he was probably 8 or 9 years old I think he was in Maryland or something, a black guy. So 8 or 9 years old, he was marching in parade, Boy Scouts parade, and he was holding the flag, the American flag, or the Scout flag, he was holding the American flag during the parade. And somebody threw rocks at him because he was a little black kid holding the American flag. And this wasn't in the South, Deep South or anything. This was in Maryland, I think in Baltimore, I believe. So this guy named Daryl Davis, well, at that time, he was very bewildered. He was saying, well, why are he had never experienced anything like that before. Why are these people why are they so upset? Why did they throw rocks at me? And, you know, his parents or whoever were trying to explain to him, oh, well, you know, some people don't like a little black kid holding the U.S. flag. This was like the 60s, late 60s, I think, or early 70s or whatever. And he couldn't wrap his mind around it. He just could not understand how this, in his mind, he was thinking, this person doesn't even know me. Like, how can they hate me to the point of inflicting violence upon me? And so he made it, many people would probably, like, have a sense of resentment in them and like hold that with them. He did not. He kind of made it his mission in life to figure out this question, like, how can this person hate me when they don't know me? And so he was a musician. He was playing when he was like in his 20s or 30s or whatever. When he got older, he was a very accomplished musician. He would play these regular gigs in like blues bars, and from time to time he would be in the South, rural areas, and on one occasion a white guy came up to him and said, I've never heard a black man play this music that well. And so he said, well, originally, you know, they started talking about the history of blues music and how it came from many of the roots go back to like black musicians, which is a different story, but they kind of found a common ground, like they were talking about the history. And the other guy, the white guy, didn't know about that. And, you know, it turned out that this guy was one of the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. And so when he told him that, he said, oh, wow, that's weird. But through their shared love of music, they were talking and eventually became friends. And at a certain point, I think he was like a grand master, or he was one of the very, if not the highest level grand wizard or whatever of the KKK. He renounced his membership in the KKK. He actually gave his hood and his outfit, the white outfit, to Daryl Davis, this black man, and said, "Here, I want you to have this," as kind of like a symbol of, like, I no longer believe this. And so over the years, this guy Daryl Davis has a collection of these robes from all these people in the KKK that he's quote unquote converted. And he goes around and does TED Talks, and there was like a documentary made about him. And the secret for him is he could have had this conversation about the music, and a lot of people would have just stared at the guy in horror. You're a member of the KKK, you're the Grand Wizard of the KKK, got up and left. Like, what if somebody sees me talking to this person, or I fear for my safety, or whatever. But he had that question in his mind from when he was a little kid, like, how does this person hate me if they don't even know me? And so it was just like this curiosity. And so he treated the other person in a way that, they were both just human beings talking. They were on the same level. Like, he didn't call them a racist. He didn't, attack them or verbally attack them or judge them. He just started the conversation and had a real human conversation with them.
But you do call Putin a dictator or something worse, right? So would you be able to...
Hang on. So let me finish. The story of Daryl Davis is the antidote to the binary thinking of us versus them. That's the most stark example I could think of, and I encourage anybody to read the books about Daryl Davis. I mean, there's YouTube videos, there's TED Talks, there's all sorts of, there's a documentary, I think it's called Accidental Courtesy. It's about his life and his story, and he's still out there doing it. I think he's in his 60s now, and he's still kind of following this mission. And like, for me, that's the greatest example we could have of like just engaging with one another.
So as an example you will be willing to follow personally?
Of course.
So what would you, if you had a chance to talk to Putin face to face, what would you tell him? What would you tell him? What would you, what would you tell him? What question would you ask him?
I would ask him many of the same questions. He would probably push back and say, well, they said no eastward expansion of NATO. I would say, well, it's not written down. Where can you show me that all these different nation states agreed to this, or where was it formalized? And I would be interested to hear what he had to say. Maybe he would change my mind. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Ukraine and Russia. I have done a pretty large amount of reading and listening to different people's opinions, and of course, by no means an expert, but I would.
Sure, as a person,
I would
as
treat
a
him,
citizen.
I would treat him. I would treat him. Bill Maher, who's he has an HBO show. He's kind of like an entertainer, but also like a political pundit.
I know.
He's on HBO. He will. He was invited to the White House by President Trump 6 months ago or something, and so he had the same sort of tact. He went because the President of the United States is inviting you. He had dinner with them, and they had a normal, quote unquote, normal conversation. And Bill Maher was saying, pushing back on people that say, "Oh, Trump is a monster. He's But Bill Maher was saying, the person that you see on Truth Social and on videos and in press conferences is not the same person that I interacted with. He was funny, he was charming, he was smart, and that's something that we have. He's not saying it's good or bad, or he's just saying, this is what I experienced, and I'm bringing it to the world, so you could see a different side of this person. And we have to consider all those things.
Yeah, so you're open to Putin being not the same as he's portrayed in this country in the media, right?
Yes,
Open
but
to that possibility.
The problem
Totally
is
possible.
the system in Russia is not as robust as our system. And again, I understand because
That's not Putin's fault.
well, he shouldn't be taking advantage of it.
Oh well, if he hadn't, someone else would. Someone else would took advantage of the system, took his head.
No, I don't
So
necessarily
if
agree
he
with
hadn't
that.
done it, he's endangered himself.
I don't necessarily agree with that because Hitler, Germany could have gone in 1933 when Hitler took over as chancellor. Are you saying that like he didn't have a choice in that matter? Because there was no system. You could remake in the U.S. During the Revolution, there was no system. The system was you do whatever the king tells you. That was the system. We created our own system. Putin can create, and the Russian people could create a new, better system. And they already have
Maybe they already have. The system they have probably better than the Tsar system, better than the Soviet Union system. So they have, to the best of their ability, given the circumstances, they create the best system they have, or they deserve, right?
Yeah, I can't speak to that because I'm not an expert on the Russian system. I know a little bit, but I think I do know enough that they can do a better job. And and there are people.
Maybe they will, given time.
Yeah, hopefully.
There's always progress in time. Progress in time are different dimension.
Yeah, I hope so. I really do hope so because they're a nuclear power. They're a huge country, very influential.
Very good potential. So
as the U.S. has a lot of good potential.
Well, the U.S. that goes without saying. It's already materialized. So the same question. What would you have to say to Joe Biden? Because during his presidency, that's when Putin started this war. So what would you say to him, or Boris Johnson, for that matter? What would you say to them?
I would have said on this particular
with regard
issue.
to the situation, Ukraine situation.
Ukraine situation.
Yeah, we don't have to go back like 50 years or go forward in 20 years. Just that juncture for that.
I mean, I don't know if I would have. I agree with the Biden administration that we support Ukraine because Ukraine was an ally of the United States, and you have to support your ally, or you don't have to, but you should support your allies to the best of your ability. And we were giving 50 billion or whatever. I forgot what the final tally was, or the ongoing tally, or whatever. I think we probably gave. And a lot of that was a little bit misleading because a lot of it was our old equipment that we just wanted to give to them because it was made way for new equipment.
Yeah, it's still better than their own equipment, which is
right. So I agree
era.
with the Biden administration in the sense that yes, we should have helped Ukraine. Again, probably not.
After you talk to Putin, then you talk to Biden, you were still the same. You consider what Putin has told you, and you guys had a good beer and a nice talk. You go back to talk to Joe Biden.
Well, this is after the invasion?
After the invasion.
Sorry, special military operation.
After the invasion, after a while, and the hostility rose to the two sides to a certain level, and there's a stalemate, if you will. You talk to Putin, you had a good conversation, good understanding, still disagreement, right? Then you go to Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. What would you say to them? Or what do you want to know from them?
I would I would just say keep up the good work. No, I would try to.
You have my vote.
Yeah, as far as foreign relations, I would. I don't know. I would have to think about it. But it's, the U.S. was not a primary player in the invasion of Ukraine.
You don't think that's
No, I mean, we supported Ukraine. I would have said, President Biden, yeah, I think you should continue to support Ukraine to the best of our ability. Maybe not as much as you are right now, maybe slow the brake, or put the brakes on a little bit, but continue doing what you're doing. Ukraine is an ally of ours. Russian hegemony needs to be checked. And, you know, the main thing is...
I think, what would you tell Biden or ask him about, why didn't you want to negotiate with Putin? Repeatedly, at Putin's request, you want to talk, you want to negotiate. Why did you say no or brush him off? Repeatedly.
I don't know if I would have brought that up because I don't remember the negotiation. You know, at one point I probably knew more about like the kind of years leading up to the invasion. So I don't know if I would have talked to Biden. I mean, I would have asked him questions. What is your motivation of, like, why didn't you try harder to resolve Putin's concerns?
Right, that was my question.
Yeah, I mean, that would have given me insight into what Putin says. Because maybe Biden would have been like, well, what? I would have said, well, President Putin says this, and this about NATO expansion and that. But I mean, to a certain extent, I know the answers to those questions already.
Yeah.
Biden would have, if he has any sense, he would have said the same thing I would have.
Which is
There was no formal written agreement about NATO expansion. And why didn't, if he's so concerned about NATO expansion, why didn't Putin, instead of trying to join NATO, why didn't he try to, if he saw it as such a threat, why didn't he try to repel the Baltic states 25 years ago when they joined? Why didn't he make a big deal about it then? Yeah, that's
why should he deal with different countries the same way?
He has less credibility.
Well, Putin doesn't need credibility with you.
That's true.
He has power.
Mm-hmm.
When credibility falls short, he uses power.
Yeah.
Well,
we've seen that.
Yeah.
Not only in Ukraine, but in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, in various other parts of...
What do you think happened in Georgia?
In 2008, there was, again, you know, at one point I knew more about the situation in Georgia, but I know there's like disputed territories, and you know, it's not as cut and dried, as simple as it's portrayed on either side. But you know, I don't have a lot to say about it because you can only kind of hold on to so much or retain so much. But
Sure.
But overall I think it's just Russia being Russia and being, you know, trying to...
Russia being in fear. Don't you think?
No, Russia expanding their hegemony to have more power, personal power for the president.
Okay. Don't you think in Boris Johnson and Biden's mind, especially near the beginning of the war, Ukraine war, they believe they could win. Their side could win, can defeat Russia. And fairly easily, in a reasonable amount of time. Don't you think that's what's in their mind?
No, I remember at the beginning of the invasion that most people, I mean, I thought that Russia would take over the entirety of Ukraine. If not temporarily, then for good. Like that was the zeitgeist.
If the West didn't intervene.
Well, we had already intervened.
Oh.
We were supporting Ukraine, or we were starting to, but there was the option of putting, you know, closing the skies, as they were said back then, of having the NATO NATO planes or
F-16s.
Yeah, of military planes from the U.S. and NATO or whatever NATO countries control the airspace over Ukraine. That was something that the Ukrainians were asking for, but it was not given. So the US and NATO drew the line. They said, no, we're not gonna do that, it's too much of a risk, or for whatever reason, they didn't do that. So, you know, you wanna support your allies, but how much are you gonna support them?
Sure, America
That's
first.
the question.
You think the U.S. should support Israel in the Middle East situation with regard to Iran?
Israel
Gaza?
is an ally of the US and has been for many decades.
Can that be changed? You just said there's no permanent, what's the saying?
Yeah, I don't think it will change anytime soon. I don't think there's any reason for it to change because there are a lot of people with ties to Israel that are American citizens, whether they live here or whether they live there, all over the world. There are people who have a strong influence
Right,
in
influence.
government or whatever, and that's.
But in your mind, you say ally, so that implies there's a non-ally. So isn't that binary mindset, allies and non-ally? Because ally, mind you, ally implies international affairs. Ally implies military.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to have that mindset to a certain extent
Why?
because.
So in that case, you'll make an exception to allow binary mindset. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we have no choice because there is a huge portion of the world that is actively attacking basic human rights. For instance, Iran.
So it's about human rights when
Yes.
when it comes to support for Israel.
Yes.
It's about human rights. Whose human rights we're supporting?
So
when we treat Israel as a military ally, whose human rights
So are we
is the U.S.
speaking
supporting?
generally now or about the Israel situation?
About Israel's situation.
So in Israel, it's not as open and transparent as the U.S. is, but that's because of their geography. They're surrounded, you know, geographically they're in a tough spot. They're a small country. They have hostile entities on many of the sides. A few years ago, you know, we had the Abraham Accords. Things were looking up a bit. Saudi Arabia and Israel kind of normalized relations. There was a few other countries that kind of normalized, Middle Eastern countries that normalized relations with Israel.
On the way, also.
And that I think maybe didn't sit well with Iran, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with those people. And so they conducted the October 7th attacks. And as an ally, I think Israel deserves our support from that standpoint, because then, you know, if we say any other country is our ally, then we lose credibility. And Israel does have basic human rights. There are 2 million Palestinian citizens, ethnically Palestinian citizens of Israel proper, and they have not 100% of the rights, I don't think, that a Jewish Israeli citizen would have, but they have basic human rights. There's
how
no doubt
come
about
human
that.
rights never been mentioned about Iran? Because the current administration, they have war with Iran. They cited
The
many
current
reasons.
US administration?
Yeah, many reasons in their stance against Iran, but human rights is not one of those.
I'm pretty sure Trump at some point mentioned it.
I'm sure he did.
I don't know. I mean,
This is Trump being Trump, right?
He says so much. Like one second he'll say it's about the oil, and then the next tweet or Truth Social or whatever he'll say it's about something else.
That's why it's so remarkable. Human rights have never been mentioned.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they have been, because he has commented.
You just said you weren't sure.
No, he's commented about. I say I'm not sure because I can't think of a specific instance, but he has where he said the words human rights, but he has said like they're killing their own people, they killed 35,000 people. So he's alluding to human rights. And he said there were protesters, they're killing 35,000 protesters, or 40,000, or whatever the number he said. It was in the tens of thousands. And he's alluding to this government is taking away the human rights of their own people.
True, he did said that. I'll give you that. Maybe that implies human rights.
Yeah, and I'm not
Mass execution.
I'm not the Trump administration. If I was in charge, I would try to stabilize the region by helping Israel, because Israel is a stabilizing force in the region. Again, we had the Abraham Accords several years ago through the first Trump administration, and it normalized relations with the Saudis, with Israel. That I thought had the potential to make things more stable in the region, because it has been.
So are you aware that your analysis, latter minutes we have focused on Middle East surrounding Israel? Are you aware that your analysis, your approach, your mindset is kind of binary? Israel is this stabilizing force, implying the other side isn't. So do you think that's conducive to a peaceful solution?
So the unfortunate reality of the world is that you have many people who are in charge of countries, and many a large percentage of their population, let's say for Iran, for example, who have ideas about human rights which are rooted in 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years, whatever, 7th century, 8th century, and they believe that things should be the way they were back then. They believe that's what needs to happen now. So you can't, that's not stabilizing. That's not sustainable. You're gonna run into problems with that. It's not something that is sustainable. And because we are a global society, because we have trade between countries, we have to deal with that at some point. And when another country attacks another country, which is our ally, we're going to support them. I mean, October 7th happened, and you could go back before that, and decades before that, and keep going further back to 2,000 years ago. But the reality is that the state of Israel was created 75, almost 80 years ago, and that's the reality. And it's not going anywhere. It's not going to be dissolved. It's not going to be, taken over by another country or whatever. It's here to stay. That's not going to change.
That's a given.
That has to be accepted. The Saudis accepted it. I forget which other Middle Eastern countries were part of. I don't want to misspeak, but there was a couple other countries as part of the Abraham Accords. They said, okay, we've had enough of the nonsense.
Egypt.
Yeah, you're right. Egypt, we want to, and Egypt has had huge problems with Israel in the past. But they're willing to move on because they recognize that Israel is here to stay. They're our ally because, for various reasons, economic reasons, but also because they provide kind of a stabilizing thing in the Middle East.
It's very dangerously close to binary because it's not dissolve the Jewish state or continue. There are many ways the form of the nation can evolve or change in terms of who's in charge, the composition of population, or composition of political system. So there are many ways the Jewish state could be different from how it is today in terms of who has the right to be president, who has the right to be in parliament, and their diplomatic stance, their military stance. There are many ways that can change beyond recognition, if you will, It's not just whether Israel exists as a state or not. Maybe it can change the name because of what's inside has changed, based under a certain international agreement, including the U.S. and major powers, Russia, China, and major powers in that region, including probably Iran. Depends on how things go. There's many ways outside of binary. I know binary is a trap that got a lot of people, me included, but we should not stop the endeavor to think outside the box.
It's a difficult situation because you have, you have Hamas, you have Hezbollah, you have Iran, you have all these different types of entities. You're not dealing with nation states. It's not Russia and Ukraine. It's these different proxies. So it's much more complicated. You have underground tunnels. You have, it's a huge mess. It can't get any messier than it is with Israel and the Palestinians. And it has been that way for a long time. I would, in order to combat the binary thinking, I would encourage Netanyahu to engage in talks with whoever's in charge on the other side, and try to resolve things peacefully, in order to just get to the place where things are peaceful. But like you said with Putin, I mean, there was no October 7th with Ukraine. There was no bus bombings in Moscow. There was no intifada in Moscow. And again, it's a double standard when it comes to Israel, because Israel experienced all these things. They experienced attacks over decades. First Intifada, Second Intifada, October 7th, various other attacks. And I'm not saying Israel is innocent, and I'm not Team Israel per se, but I do recognize that Israel is treated differently, and there's a double standard when it comes to them, and I don't like it. It's just intellectually lazy, because you're just putting them in this bucket of the bad guys. I'm not going to expound on why that is, because that's a whole different subject. But I hope, I have some hope. There are different examples throughout recent history, like the Troubles in Northern Ireland, where they were at each other's throats for most of the 20th century, bombing each other and killing each other not just because of religion. It was the Protestants and the Catholics in Northern Ireland. There were other factors in play that contributed to the conflict, but they figured it out. And for the last 25 years, after almost a century of conflict, they have found peace, and they get along. Different situation, not as intense as the Middle East, but like places like Rwanda, there was basically, in the 90s when they had their civil war, when they had atrocities where they were hacking each other's limbs off. And it was a really bad situation where...
They've done that for eons. That's how...
No.
That's how...
This was a particular case where in Rwanda, one ethnicity was massacring another ethnicity.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They've done that.
No, this was a specific incident.
Of course, the latest
in Rwanda.
The latest incident.
That's human history you're talking about, but this was in one nation state, and we're supposed to be beyond that. Like, this was the 1990s. We're not supposed to be doing that as humans to each other anymore. We're not supposed to be massacring each other because of religion or ethnicity or whatever. But there was I forgot his name. He was a dictator, and I need to learn more about the Rwandan history. But since these different reforms, they basically had a national reconciliation, where they just all kind of looked at each other and said, well, that was crazy, let's stop, let's figure out how to all get along. And they've had relative peace since then. And it took like a dictator, I think, to kind of implement the new system, whatever the new system is. I don't know enough about Rwanda, but I do know that it's a relative success story in the sense that, you know, there are other places in the world where civil wars like that go on for decades, like Syria or Sudan, places like that where it just continuous, keeps happening. And it's like almost like a forever war. But in Rwanda, it took years, but they had like a national awakening where they kind of figured it out how to get along. And
yeah, that's a state that's artificial in the sense that they didn't evolve internally to be one state so that different parts of the population had the consensus, had the common ground to work together as a nation, as opposed to, so they don't have that basis. That's why you have more turmoil, more civil war, as opposed to another state, like, let's say Germany, right? They have hundreds of territories and then form into state. They have their path of historical path. U.S. is a unique historical path. Maybe Rwanda and a lot of African countries, even Middle Eastern countries, are going through that path. Maybe they will form into state, or maybe they're not going to. Maybe they form multiple states. If you hold mentally multiple states into one state, then you will have so-called civil war. Actually, they're not strictly civil war. They're not supposed to be one nation to begin with.
So I think the things have changed because the U.S. has had massacres like Rwanda had in its history. You know, whether it was like what the U.S. government did to Native Americans, or, I mean, there's multiple examples of this throughout U.S. history where, and I'm not saying Native Americans were innocent. They attacked white settlers too and things like that, but there have been atrocities throughout U.S. history. I acknowledge that, and I'm not saying America good, so-and-so bad.
You're not binary.
Because we need to avoid that thinking.
Aware
I
of
try
that,
to treat every group and every nation state in the same way from a geopolitical standpoint. And you know, Rwanda is a relatively new country. It's maybe 60 years old, something like that, 65 years old. And so that was part of, in the 90s, they were only 30 years old, so that was part of their growing up process, just like 30 years after the Revolutionary War that we were massacring different groups in the US. So I believe the establishment of nation states, like when Rwanda gained its independence in 1960, or whenever it was, it's probably around 1960.
Yeah,
that's a good thing. That's a good thing because it's the idea of a nation state is a stabilizing thing. It's a fourth, and if you look at human history, you know, before and after the establishment of nation states, you're going to see that human misery has decreased. There's less killing, less war. So the nation states are a good thing. The way they were created, especially...
Not for Rwanda.
Well, no. Overall, I believe it's a good thing because,
yeah, but
trust me, they had...
If you're a Rwanda father, son, if your family in Rwanda, you will say, it's not good for me. And from my standpoint, I have to do the best for myself.
I can't say that.
My family, my country.
I would like to learn more about Rwandan history, but the few things that I've seen show that it's a relatively, compared to other countries in that region, it's relatively prosperous. They have their problems, but they're doing better than they were doing 20 or 30 years ago. And like I said, nation states nobody's calling for like Rwanda to be driven into the sea or to be dissolved. I'm sure they have enemies in the region, but you know, I think the political leaders should just focus on human rights of their people and promoting peace with the countries in their region. Because that's where the wars start. They're regional. They're not, we declared war on Japan in World War II. They were on the other side of the world. But that doesn't happen anymore. If there's going to be a war, it's going to be a regional war. Unless, obviously, it's a nuclear war. But that's what countries should focus on, just like having good relations with their neighboring countries, and providing basic human rights for their people. And there's a huge proportion of countries that have leaders that do not promote basic human rights, mostly because of religious reasons. They want to regress to the 7th century because they have no separation of church and state. They have this kind of theocratic mindset where there is no separation between governance of a nation state and religion.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance. If we go into nuance, then we can at least reduce the binary mindset. Then we can go from there, maybe better opportunity for peace, peaceful solutions, mutual understanding.
I'm all for talking to people who are in power in these countries who have, like, I'm not for invading a country because they're not giving their people basic human rights. I would go and talk to them. There's a kind of an interesting example of professional wrestling, WWE. So for years I've been watching it since a little kid. I watch it with my dad. They've expanded the empire of professional wrestling, this particular company, WWE, where they're a global brand now. So they hold events in Australia, in France, in the UK, and pretty much once or twice a year in usually like Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, or somewhere in Saudi Arabia. And the first time they did it, it was a big deal because it was a huge event. It was like a global event. And they have the men wrestling, and they also have women wrestling. Saudi Arabia has, treats women differently than the U.S. So the women wrestlers, normally they show a lot of skin. If they're wrestling in the U.S. In Saudi, they were wearing, not head coverings, but they were covered pretty much from head to toe. They had, actually at first, the very first event, they didn't have any women wrestling because it was just the men, because that's how their society was. So then the next year, they had maybe a couple women's wrestling matches, and then the next year, but the women were fully covered. They had like body, loose-fitting suits and stuff. And then the following year, they had like fully covered, but maybe they were a little tighter. So you saw the progression of, they're all culturally, there's this kind of change culturally. So there is a change, I think, a little bit, and MBS in Saudi is contributing to that a little bit of like, maybe women should have the same rights as men, something like that.
Right to wrestle.
Right to wrestle, maybe. I don't think there are no Saudi women wrestlers right now that I know of, but, or at least that are legitimate or, legal. But the other, like MBS in recent years has relaxed the rules on women being allowed to drive in Saudi. So, yeah. I mean, that's a good trend, I think. I would agree.
Uh-huh. So there's hope. Even MBS is not trying to get out of he's aware of the binary, he's trying to get out of it, bringing his country to the future.
Yeah, and it doesn't
not stuck in the past.
The Saud family it doesn't get much dictatorial or monarchistic as that. Like they're a family monarchy for the last almost 100 years. So if they're being a little bit progressive, you know, there is some hope.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you.